Welcome to Module 9, and hopefully you were successful in completing Module 8. If you haven't, make sure that you complete it as a homework type exercise. So I'm on the course website here. Excuse me. Supposedly no lecture this time, but remember, because you got the extension on the business report, use this session for asking questions from your tutors for further advice on the business report. And if you've just started, you better really pull your finger out, because you really don't have much time left. The main concern about this video will be to introduce what we're doing on the better part of this module, which is the Access Database, Block 2. So let's have a look at what's in Block 2. Block 2, as before, we have the workshop material supplied to us, and you have activities 0, 1, 2, 3, right up to 7. Okay, so what's actually happened in this? Oh, by the way, remember, test your knowledge. Make sure that you understand what sort of questions that you'll be asked in the final test. Just a sampler for you there, right? Make sure that you do all the in-class knowledge stuff. So, okay, workshop material. Workshop material, again, I've provided the links for each activity. They're separate pages within Canvas for you. So if you do this session correctly, you should complete all of these stages, 1, 2, 3, 4, right up to 7. I've provided all of the databases here for you, even the final complete version. So you may actually want to download all of these, put them into a directory, as you'll probably see later that I have already. But let's have a look, because this is the introduction part. I'm actually going to introduce what is in activity 0, right? So far in activity, in the previous week's activities, we looked at creating a database. So all the aspects around a database for what is a table, what is a query, all those objects, right, were introduced to you. In the first session, we did creating a table, making sure that you understand what is a primary key, what is a foreign key, what is an attribute, and then reflects back into a database as a field, and a field contains data, right? So you must make sure that you've actually gone through the first part, because it was all about setting up a database before we start using it, right? The other aspect in the first session was that we were setting up the database ready for use, but we also employed create a form for data entry for users of our database as well, because we don't want them to directly access data within the tables through data sheets, right? So we want to give them an interface almost mimicking same as a website. So a website would give the person a website to fill in their details, and that information then gets stored in the database. So we don't give every web user access to our database directly, right? So we use forms. Now in this session here, we're making it usable. In other words, what does that really mean? It means the next step is to actually use the database to create some kind of information for us. And information means that we process the data by using things like queries and reports to to show the user, the result of the data in some sort of usable information. Okay, so this session will be concerned about queries, and very important for you guys to know what a dynamic query and so forth. What's the rest of the videos, all the different types of queries that we're looking at. Remember, in this course we're not using any action type queries, which means directly updating data within the database. We're only using select queries, which means we're selecting fields and we're extracting data, right, and then formatting it appropriately. Same as the second part for this tutorial is the queries, which is probably the most important thing about databases. And then reports. How do we actually format and create simple reports? Now for this session, as soon as I finish this, you should go to the activity 0 page and just refresh your knowledge of the different objects which exist in Microsoft Access. So I recommend you play this thing again, which you should have played last week, but just to refresh your memory about what are the different types of objects, how do they all link together in this activity. So away you go. I'll catch you in the next activity. So let's continue with the activities. As you can see here, I'm at the workshop materials page again, and the first activity you should have already looked at the access objects video, just to refresh your memory about the structure of a database and the objects which we can use within it to manipulate data and so forth. Right. This next exercise is creating a simple database, right? But before we do that, I recommend just download all of your files and load them into a directory like I've done here. So I've put all my files into how would say, into a folder, appropriate folder. For me, it's ISYSX 2056 week 9. And the first exercise we'll be using is the 2-1, so first activity database, right? So you can even open that. I will now. So I'm opening my database, but let's go back to the exercises here. And if I actually go into the activity, the first activity is about creating a simple query. And simple query implies creating a query which is only operating on one table. Okay. Now I recommend you pause the video right now and go off and have a look at the explanation of what is a simple query before we actually start the exercise. So there's a YouTube there available for you guys to look at before we start the exercise. So go ahead and pause right now, and then we'll continue straight after. Alright, you should have seen the video. We've actually looked through the video now, if you did the instructions correctly, and you should have already opened and downloaded the file for the first activity, which is the Access DB, Access Database. You'll probably find when you open your database, you'll actually see here that when I open my database, there's also an equivalent file called 2.1 LACDB, and that's actually a lock file. So it's actually locking the file, which means it's 0 bytes, right? So just to identify for access when it's manipulating a file, a database itself. Now remember, for your assignment, it's extremely important. It's happened many times. Students have been submitting I'm not sure whether you actually have to submit in this case, but sometimes be really careful when you're passing databases around that you're not sending in lock file, right? I know in previous semesters students had to submit a database. When they did, they were submitting this 0 bytes, and it was really causing problems. So always make sure that when you're sending something to someone, you do the ACDB, and you notice here it's 3.5 meg. Right? Alright, so let's get back to the exercise at hand, and what happens is we're actually going to be looking at opening this database, and the database, what we're going to do is actually operate on one table. So a simple query means that we're actually only creating a query which operates on one table. So let me switch over here to my database. And you can see here I've got the database, and now we've got the tables, which you should be familiar, all the tables over here created in this database. If I right click on a table, I can open it, I can go into design view, or I can double click on the table. Once I've double clicked, I can actually see in data sheet view what is contained in that table. And I can go into design view over here, which you should have learnt, or from down the bottom here, design view, to get into manipulating what are the field names and what data types we're assigned to them. If we've got a number, make sure that you understand what type of number. Is it a byte, integer, and so forth. And remember, for primary key, foreign keys, these types for numbers must be the same, right? So when you're creating relationships, remember that as well. Now, other important thing is, how do I close this? When you've got a whole bunch of tables opened up, it's much easier just to do a right click and close all before you do anything else, right? So in this case, the exercise, if you follow the instructions, step 1, step 2, all the way through, we'll actually be creating a simple query. You notice we don't have any queries here, we've just got the forms for data entry. Okay, data entry into these tables. So we will be creating a query using the program table. All right. So let's have a look here. I'll go create, and notice the objects, table, queries, forms, reports. We will be using not the query wizard, but we're using the query design. So I'll go to design here. Now I'm in the design mode for a query. Right? And before I start, I'm actually just going to save this query as it says in the instructions to save it with a name called, if I remember correctly, it was program details. So I'll just copy it from my other screen, and I'm just going to save this, so I can go to File, Save up the top, or File, Save as well. Right? So I'll usually use the Quick and Easy or the Control S, but in this case, just for the demo, I'll click the icon. That would be the query name. Very, very useful, right? No, so I'm going to give this query program details because we want to list all the program details within that table. So I'll save it. And there you notice one of my objects here is the query that I've just created. And now I can operate on the query here. Now the query has a data set here, and the data set enables you to pick items for a particular table, right? Like the field parameters. So how do we add tables to this? I can just click and drag in here, right? I'm going to delete that, right? Or alternatively, I can just go up here and say add table. So in design menu, I can add tables. So over here, I can actually double click on the table. Or I can even do a right click show tables, right? Which is the same as add tables, which will give me this. Now let me just show you again. Right click show tables, and I can even drag from there as well. So simple query means that we're operating on the one table. I'm going to close that. You notice I've got a property sheet here as well, so I can get properties of the individual tables, which I can play around with, but we're not really worried about that at the moment, so I'm just going to close it. Now, how do I query these parameters? What we do is we can now, because I have a table in here, oh, by the way, let's save. I can actually go down to the data set here and actually pick the individual items or the fields that I want to operate on. You notice there's one here called program star. The star means, same as the item up here, star means list all parameters. So it's actually a wildcard, right? A wildcard saying all of these items. But for this exercise, I don't want to show the program ID, and I don't want to pick from here, so I'm just going to do the simple thing is you double click what you want in your query as a data set. So if I double click here, it's added the category from the table program. Okay? I can do the same thing for the other guys. I'll do display, discount, and price. So now, whenever this query runs, so if I execute this query, it'll return all of the parameters of category, discount, and price from the table program. Right, so let's try it. Let's go to save. And then your option is either run the query, or you can even just do a straight view. Right? So you can go into view or SQL view if you're really advanced later on, but I recommend don't do this until you really know what you're doing with databases. But I can go to datasheet view, and the query is executed and returned the values that the query extracted from the program table. Okay, so that was the first query, which is a select query. I'll go back into design. Just to finish off, there are other parameters here which you'll be covering very shortly. Is the sort parameter, so you can actually go in and do a sort. You can also do the criteria, which means that I can look for certain values for this particular field. So for this field, I could put a criterion there saying I just want gold or whatever program category, and it will just list that. Okay, alternatively, same thing, there's an OR function. So if I just list all my parameters in here saying gold, discount 10 or something or other, it would mean just return values which are the same as category and discount. But if I actually put in gold here and then put down here 10, it'll mean OR, which means it'll give me gold and 10, not just, sorry, both of the criteria will be matched as an OR, so I'll get more records if there are available. Right? The other thing you should know as well, you can highlight these guys and then delete, which means get rid of the item, or alternatively, I'll put it back, I can also do this sort of thing. I can say I want it in a different order as well, so you can highlight and shift them around. Okay. Alright, so I hope that helped you out. That was the first exercise for today, the simple query, which means query, create, query design on a single table. So select query on a single table. Right. I'll switch over to the next activity. Our next activity is to create a dynamic query, which means previously when we did a simple query on one table, we can also do queries which are static queries using multiple tables. So we can put in a whole bunch of tables, and then a static query will just return the same required result from all of those tables. But what we want to do is we actually want to make our queries a little bit more usable, where the user can enter some kind of data to look for, to filter out the data. So to do that, we need to create what's called a dynamic query. I'll just open up the exercise. And a dynamic query, what it does, it actually presents the user with a little dialog box. And that dialog box is for the user to type in some information for the query to use as a filter. Right? So we're not using the static query at the moment, but I'll open up this database, the 2.2. So exercise 2.2 is this guy here. So I'll double click on this guy, and my database should be open. So I'll switch over here. Now, I've just opened up the database, and make sure that you actually enable content whenever you're running your databases, just to be sure, right? Because it can cause issues if you don't enable, you could lose all your data. So especially for your tests and so forth, make sure you enable all the operations available in Access. Right? So for this case, what they want us to do is, I'll switch back over here. To create this dynamic query, we're going to open this database and then open the query design, right? Design view, which we did previously as well, right? And we add the client table. Okay, so that's what we're really after. So let's switch over, and I'm going to go to create. We know now design view, and I'm going to add the client table. All right, and open it up a bit. Just so we can see all the parameters. And what the exercise wants us to do is to add the first name, last name, and postcode and state for the client. So first name, last name. You notice I'm double clicking on these guys, right? And it was postcode and state. Okay, so let's save this query. And in the exercise, they ask us to call it list. So I'm going to save, and they've asked us to save it as list client by state. Right. Okay. So I'm going to save that. Now you can see that we've effectively got two queries in here now. I don't need to add tables and so forth at the moment, so I'm just going to close that. Now, to operate on this table, if I just execute it as it is, right? So I'll save and I'll just view it. I'm actually getting a list of all the first name, last name. So we've extracted the data which we've asked for in the parameter data set down the bottom here. Okay. All right. Now, so what we want to do is further in the exercise is start to filter and do some tricky things with the data. Right? And the first one was to actually sort. We want to go back and sort the data for last name, right? And the way we do that is we go to last name, and the last name has a sort parameter here. So I can click on here and I'll say ascending. What has that done? Let's have a look. Let's stop. And a good idea when you've actually made some modifications, just view or run your query just to see whether you actually are progressing or not. So go OK, and you notice we've sorted on the last name, so it's alphabetical A's, B's, right? And you can obviously do the same things for other parameters as well, but in this case we've only asked for the last name. Now here is where we start doing some filtering, not just sorting, right? So what we want to do is we've run this query, and what we want to do is list only the Victorian records, so only the records or customers or clients that we've got only from Victoria. The way we do that is we use the criteria field down the bottom here. We go to state, and we would type in and you'll notice something very nice about Access is I can just type in Vic and then hit the tab key and watch what happens to the Vic. You notice the Vic is surrounded by double quotes. So instead of typing this sort of stuff in, it's a good idea. I'll do it again. I'll go back here and I'll just type Vic. And if you do tab, the Access DBMS will actually complete what is required within that field, right, for us. So Vic. So what we've said is only list these parameters or these fields, and we want to sort by last name and only show me data for Vic. So I'm going to save and I'll execute it. And you notice here now I've only got clients which are in Victoria, right? Now, to make that more usable, because see that's still a static query, and if we gave this to someone, let's say on a website, and we wanted someone to filter out the different types of states, what we'd need to do is actually modify, we would have to modify this query. So we'd always have to come back here, do design view, change this to Queensland and so forth. So what we want to do is we want to make this query dynamic. So this value actually is set by the user. So it's dynamic, it changes, right? So, and the way we do that is if you go back to your exercise, you'll actually see in part 11, to create a dynamic query, we need to use what is called the square brackets with a message in between. So I'm just going to copy this guy, right? And I'm going to paste it into my criteria in my database. So in here, I'm just going to paste, and I'm going to spread it out a bit. So here, what I've done is I've actually put in square bracket and then said enter state, and I've given an example of what the state data should look like by the user with a close bracket. Now the brackets, the square brackets, will actually create a dialog box, and the message between the square brackets will be displayed on the dialog box for the user. Then there's a field there which the user can type into. So let's execute this. I'll save and I'll run it. And you notice here the square brackets imply the dialog box, and the text between the square brackets will be shown as a message to the user. And this input box is what is returned or substituted back here as a filter. So if I did just Vic, right, Vic, it would replace all of this as a filter as what we did previously. It says Vic, right? So if I say OK, it just runs for Vic, right? So I can go back and I can re-execute this guy. So I'll click here, click again, right? And now I can type in Queensland, right? Queensland. And it'll only give me Queensland. And you notice I didn't have to go back and change or recode or change the text in here. So this query can now be run by other queries or other reports. Right? So I'll run New South Wales and you notice now we have a dynamic query. Right? So dynamic query, square brackets, so square brackets with a message between it, which means you'll get the dynamic query prompting the user for some input. Okay, so you're in the next activity. Okay, here we are for the next part of the session, which is activity 3, and it would be creating a query. We're still going to use the original one, which we created in a dynamic, to be able to get the user in, like requirements for what state. We're going to use that same query, but this time we're going to actually create a query which will show us information about date range, like a set of records within between two dates, so within dates. So what we want to do is download this, well, if you've already downloaded it, open 2.3. So I'm just going to show you here. Here's my file, and we're going to use 2-3. So I'm going to open that. And here's my file open, and once again I'll remind you to enable content. Now if you actually see here that we've got the previous queries which we created in the last, like the simple query and then the dynamic query, but what I want to do is actually make a copy of this guy, the states dynamic query, and the easiest way of doing that is either a control C or so, but I'm just going to do control copy, cancel that, get rid of this, yep, and paste it. So control V, right? And as I'm pasting it, it gives me a new name to assign. But as we know in the exercise, if we go down here, the exercise requires us to call it list of clients for a date range, right? So I'm just going to paste that there. Right? So my new query will have that name there, and this is if we run it, it'll ask me like previously. I would have to enter a value to get the VIC and so forth. But just to show you, you can also just go directly right click to designing on that query. Now what what we want to do is we want to add the invoices as well. So we've got our dynamic down here with the square brackets, which creates the dialog for us, but we want to add the invoice table. So if I go invoice, I want to add tables, and I'm going to pick invoice, so I'm just going to drag the invoice across, right? And you notice it's already picked that these tables are actually in a relationship of one to many, right? So a client has many invoices, and you notice there's a link between the primary key to the foreign key and the foreign key, so the primary key becomes a foreign key on the many side of the relationship. Okay, so here what we want to do is we want to add the invoice sent item, right? So I'm just going to add that as it says in the instructions, right? So in design view, add that item. Now if I just switch over to the exercise, so for the exercise you can see that we've been asked to put in a criteria which runs between dates, and Access provides us with a special command saying between, which we say here, between. And what we're going to do is we're going to create, you notice the square brackets here, two dialogues. So in other words, one date entry, the first date entry will be a prompt, and then another square brackets, which means we're going to have effectively in this criteria, we're going to have two dialogues being prompted for us to enter data. Okay, all right, so what I'm going to do is just copy that, and I'm going to paste it into my database. So down here in the criteria field for sent, I will paste my, if I double click here, yep, Oh, it's not doing it. Let's go further across. There we go. It should go even further. It doesn't do it. Anyway, let's push this across. So now I can see that my between command will actually have two dialog boxes. This first one, prompting for the first date, and for the second date. Right? Okay. Let's just move it across a little bit. Can I move it across a bit? No, that won't allow me. Alright, doesn't matter. But now, save. And if I run it, I can put in the first criteria, which was what state. So let's just do Vic. And now I'll be prompted, and you notice here the between is the first date, so the text between the square brackets is asking me for a particular date. What were the dates? If you have a look in your in your exercise, like if I just switch over to the exercise window, you'll actually see here that the first date will be 1st of June. So I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to paste in a second. So 1st of June to the 30th of June, right, down the bottom here. Okay, so let's just go back to the main window, and so I'm going to paste the 1st of June, and you notice the way I've put the dates in, right? It's giving me an example of the dates here, so I can use 3 characters for the month, but always put in the year with 4 digits, right? So please don't put in I'll show you in the next example, but don't use 2-digit dates for year because it confuses the system a bit, right? So I'll say OK. And now the second prompt, which is the AND, right? The second prompt is asking you for the second date, and I know it was supposed to be 30th of June, right? 2019, right? So if I put in 19 and I had 19 here, and the first date was 19, the system starts getting confused about what the dates the date format is. So if my operating system is set to Japanese or American and so forth, well, American is month is first, day. So in America, if I had here 3, right? In America it would mean March, and then the 6th of March, and then if I actually just left 19, it would say 19 was the year, right? So if I use date entry, like for instance what I've just entered, depending on your operating system setup, it may interpret the date in an incorrect fashion, right? So that's why it's a good idea to always have four-digit year dates. And you can see here that now it can't really make a mistake because it'll be, you can't have 30 months, right? So it'll be interpreted as the 30th of June 2009, right? And there we go. So from the 2nd of June, and it'll keep going all the way along. So all these records, the Vic records, so the return comes back with all the records which are Vic, and then the secondary test is to see are those records that have been returned between the dates that we actually set. So here's my return. Okay. Now let's just have a look at the exercise. And as you can see, we've actually completed the exercise for this session. Right? Replay if you need to. Right? Here we are for the next exercise, and the next exercise will be the calculated query. So it has a calculation in it, and that's the power of queries, is that we can not only just extract information from the database and filter it through a dynamic, like a dialogue entry, but we can also put formulas in for us to be able to calculate things. So I'm just going to open up this exercise 4, and you can see that we're going to be using 2-4 as our database. So I'm just going to go over to my databases here. I'm going to open this guy by double clicking. If I go to master here, you notice I don't have an enable button, but if I do, I have to enable it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at creating new queries. So a new query, one one, because we want to do a calculation on, let's go back here to the exercise, because what we want to do is we want to create two queries in effect. One is to give me the data which filters the state or the customers within a state, and that filtering will also show me, I need to understand, has a membership been assigned to that customer, and if it has been assigned, what I want is the latest membership applying to that customer along with a discount. So that'll be one query, but the second query will actually have to use the first query to actually do the calculations, right? So the first query will be to list the memberships available for a client. So I'll do create here. And in the membership side, what I want to do is I want to include the client, and I want to know the membership that they have and what program that membership actually assigns to. And the way I picked that was I actually used the control click, so multiple selection. So I'll put it in here. And you can see that these guys are already in a relationship, so to speak. So now I'm going to save this query using the name which was given to us in the exercise. So if I go back over to the exercise, they want it to be called client membership. Okay, so I'll copy that over, and I'll go back to my main screen here. Now I'm going to save. If I do a save, I can paste this client membership. So it's got there. And remember, small steps, so let's just do it. What do we need as input here? So we want to know the client ID, obviously. We want to know, when did the membership start? Has it been paid? Okay. And we want to know what is the category, what's the name of it, and what is the discount for the program. Okay. And do we need the price? No, it doesn't say there, but alright, so now I can save this and run it. And you notice all my clients have been listed with all their memberships and the type of membership and what the discount value, the percentage is for it. So the first part of the exercise has been completed. Now let's use that query to perform a calculated query. So I'm going to go create new query, but I'm going to use this membership query. So I'm going to select here from the add tables. So from the add tables, select here, and I'm going to put in our latest one. So double click it. So that gives me the information that I need as the master for calculating the discount. Right? So I'll go back to the table. Now I need to get information about the clients, about the course, right? About the classes that they actually are in. So I can use this master to actually use the tables within the database to get the appropriate data, which matches, right? So attendance, class, client, and course will actually be the items which I need sub-items of. So I'm going to select those and add them. You notice they're all in a relationship. So I have relationships between class, course, and here's the client, right? Okay, now the important thing here is actually let's just save the name of this query, and fairly certain it was called memberships due, but let's just copy it over here, due payments or client payments due, if I can find it. Can't find it. Let's just I'll just save it as client payment due. Right? Okay. Now, for client payment due, what I need is parameters from those other tables to actually be able, from these other tables, to be able to calculate the overall what we're going to be charging the customer. Right? So first off, I need to use this client ID, not this one, not in the tables form, but in the query, because the query will be the master link to all the rest of the data which is available in the table. So I'm going to use this guy as my master client ID. Now with the rest of the information, have a look at your think it's section 7 in the instructions, and it says first name, last name, address, suburb. You put it in, you didn't put it in. Then we go to suburb. I need a postcode. I need, sorry, I don't need the postcode, it was code. So we're going to delete that. Right? Suburb, I'm going to say code. I'm going to say descriptive, description of the course. I'm going to say the cost of the course, and obviously what we want is this guy. That's why we actually created the membership, was to find the discount for each one of these guys, for each one of the members, and there's the discount. So now I can actually save this, run it, and yes, it's giving me a whole list of all my clients, and along with their discount codes, right, for the particular courses that they're in. Right, so now we can actually use these two fields to calculate an overall, charge to the customer. All right. So let's do that. Let's go back in here. Now in the new field across here, if I move across a little bit, can I do that? That's too much. In the new field, what I want to do is, I don't want to pick an item, right, which would be foolish of me. I want to actually put a formula in here. And the way to put a formula in here is to go to the top here and actually use Bob the Builder. There he is, right? So design, builder. If I go to builder, now I've got access to all of the parameters which are within the database that I need to use in my formula, my expression up here, right? So I can use these fields because they're available to me in the columns here. But if you don't have these listed, you would have to go into the database, right? So into the database, you'd have to go to the table and actually look for the particular items that you're after, right? But because I've got them listed already, I've included them as parameters in my data set down the bottom here. If I go to the top here, I can actually use these values for my formula. And the formula that was given to you was that we look at cost. So I can double click on cost. And cost, I would say minus, and I know it's bracket again, cost minus, cost multiplied by the discount, right? It's like minus, multiplied with shift 8 by the discount, and close bracket. Now I'll go OK. So I've created my expression here. Okay, and the expression, if you have a look, the very first part of the expression calculates the X per 1. That's actually the label that is used for the column when I run this. So let's try it before I change anything. So save, run, and you can see across here, there's my new calculated. So that's the actual charge to the customer once we've given a discount of 0.20%. So here, X per 1, I don't want to see X per 1. I want to actually see the heading as charge. Right? So how do I do that? I'll go to design, and I'll change the very last part. And you notice I didn't touch the semicolon. The double dot must stay there because Access says any text that is in front of the double dot. So any text that is on to the left of it, right, becomes a header or a label for this particular column. Okay, so make sure that you do not delete the double dot. So let's save. I'm going to run. You notice now my calculated query is that I've actually calculated the charge for each one of my customers. Right? Each one of my customers. Now the last part is to actually see how do I create or modify this query so that it only looks for particular clients. Right? And if I go back to my questionnaire in item 15, you actually see that what we want to do is we might make this query a dynamic query where we would just put the client ID. We would ask the user for the client ID, and that client would be listed for their due payments. Right? So let's just copy this, and I'll switch over back to my main screen, and in the main one, go back into design, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for the client ID, so for the ID, put in a criteria, of saying please enter the client ID using a number, right? So that's what's going to pop up as my dialog. Let's save, run, and there it is, right? Enter ID. So in this case, I'm just going to do 12. Yep, 12, and item ID says this is what is due from this customer, right, for all the courses. Okay, so I hope that helped. Go through it, make sure you pause and so forth, because you really need to know calculated queries, definitely, especially for your tests. So this is an extremely important activity. Make sure you know how to do it. Okay, so here we are for the next activity, which is starting to look at, because we've completed all the queries, and the queries, like I said before, are the most powerful thing within databases, so that we can manipulate the data which is stored in the tables, right? And we went through simple, dynamic, between dates, and a calculator. Make sure that you know how to do all of them, especially for your test, right? Now, the final part of how to use databases is to create reports. So we're going to go through 3 different activities. Let's do the first one, which is number 5, which is simple report. So I'm just going to open that tab up. And in the simple report, what we're going to do is we're going to use the report wizard, right? The report wizard to extract data from a table and then format it a little bit. Well, I'm not going to do all the formatting. You guys can try and do that in your own time. But here I've got the database. So I'm going to go over to my database area, and I'm going to open the database, which is that section 5, activity 5. So double click that. And you notice now immediately, always check when it says enable content, make sure that you've enabled it. Now for this simple report, all we want to do is create a client list, right? So I'm just going to pick the client table, right? The client table as my the list that I want as a for a report. So let's create the report. Go create report wizard. Remember, we're doing report, none of these other options here, but we're doing the report wizard. And with the report wizard, it's already picked up my client because I've highlighted here, but if it wasn't, make sure that you can pick the client. Let's put all of the parameters across, right, that I want to display in my report. And now here you can double click or pick items that you don't want to show in your report. So in the exercise, I'm just going to get rid of address, and I'm going to get rid of the suburb as well. So now I've got a list which might fit one page, right? So I'm going to first name. These are the items which will appear in my report. So let's go next. Next, this is again, I can do groupings here, which we'll touch on a little bit later. So I could actually, if I wanted to, group on states. So I can say all my clients for Victoria will be listed in such a way, right? But highlight that, get rid of it. I'm not going to do that at this point. Let's just create basically a client list that we can use as a mail out, right? So go next. Now, the fields that I would like to sort on, so I can do ascending, right? I'm going to do fields on last name, right? So I'm just going to, in the exercise it doesn't pick any, but just to show you that you can actually do ascending or descending type of sorting on a particular field in your report. So I'll go next. So I want mine formatted or sorted on last name. Now, for access, it's a good idea. Don't use portrait, because portrait will sort of bunch everything up on the right hand side for you. So try and go as far as you can. Go over to landscape, so give yourself a lot of room. And I'm going to say justified for this, but maybe even tabular will still be okay. Right? So I'll leave it at that. Go next, and I'm going to call it my client list. Right, this is the name of my report. Okay, finish. And here's my report. It's been formatted for me. What I'm going to do is try and make sure that I can see. You notice it's been chopped. So if we had portrait, it'll probably chop all the way across here, and then I have to spend most of the time, formatting stuff to make it all fit. Here I can start modifying, or looking at how do I format this report, and you would do that in I'll show you that in a second, in like design view. But you notice there's a record navigator here, so this is my first page. I can go to next page, and I can subsequently go through all of the pages to get all of my customer list. Notice the list goes to 92 pages of customers, right? So let's close this preview. And by closing the preview, we immediately come into the design view. And if you have a look here, I can actually go back to view the report, or I can go back to the design view or the layout view. I'll go to design view at this stage, just to show you that a report has several very important sections. A report has a report header, so it's a header for the overall document. It has a report footer, so if I move down here, I actually have an overall footer, so these would appear once basically. And then we also have headers for each page. So page has a header and a footer separately. So I can even, the footer here says time, date, and the number of page, or page number, which you can see here, page number. Let me get rid of the field list, so at least we can see a bit more. And obviously in the middle is the repeating information, which is the details. So all the customers will be listed per page as we go along. Right? So what I want to do is I want to make sure that my email field is a little bit bigger than that. Right? So I'm going to try and squeeze things in. I'm going to control click both of these fields, and I'm going to resize them so my postcode is a bit smaller. I'll go to select, control click all of these fields here, and I'm going to use my arrow key on the keyboard to shift everything across. Right? And what I want to do is make sure that my state field, control click both of those guys, make sure the state field is small enough. Now I'm going to move these guys across with my arrow key. Oop, a little bit too far. There we go. And now I can actually make sure that my email is large enough to be displayed. Okay, so let's try this. We'll save first, and let's view the report. And you notice it's still chopping off. Obviously, I'd have to reformat this more and more, make my page a bit wider and so forth to get all the email information in. But generally, you see how I actually went into design view and actually formatted things out, so I can use design view, layout view to actually move things around, so layout view or design view to actually modify this report. So that was our attempt at first simple report. You should know how to do that for using databases. So here we are for the next report that we generate, but now we're actually going to go into a little bit more detail. So rather than just having a client list, let's have some report which gives us a bit more information. And what we're going to do is I'm going to go into Option 6, but in this report what we're going to look at is grouping things and actually looking at summary options. Summary options means that you have to have some kind of number fields available in your query or your tables to be able to do things within the report, right? Like give summaries of total costs and so forth, right? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to open this database 2.6. We're going to use the report wizard, and the report wizard, then what we're going to do is we're going to create a report which actually shows us the client payments due. So we're going to use the query which we used previously. Right? So if I go over to here onto my files again, I can double click because we're in version 6, so I'll double click here and open my database. Now database again, you notice it's enable content, so let's just do that. Now what I'm going to do is create. I'm going to use the report wizard again. But remember this time we're going to be using the query, right? So payments due, the calculated query we used previously, right? So I'm going to use that, put all the parameters across. Now here, obviously I don't want to see the client ID, I'm really not interested in it, so remove that. Then I'm going to come down here and actually get rid of the discount um, discount part. Let me just check again just to see what we're actually taking out. So we're taking out cost and discount. That's item 2 in the instructions, right? So we leave the charge because we want to see this client, how much do they actually owe us. So go next. Right. Now here I can do a sort of like a grouping on there is the customer and there what are the charges, right? So I can do it on course as well. So I can say on a course list all the customers which for a particular charge for a course, but I'm going to leave it on client, right? So each client, and then show all the charges associated with the client. Go next. Now here's a grouping level, so I can group things by saying things like group by suburb, right? So, or actually let's take that out, a more important one would be by state. So for Victoria, list all my clients, and for those clients give me all the charges. So it's really up to you. You can pick your own types of groupings if you need to. In this case, I'm just going to leave it at the standard. So I just see all the customers. Go next. Now, here's an important bit, is you already realised I'm just going to do, how to say, sorry, I'm not going to do any kind of sorting on the fields that I've added to my report, but what I'm after is this summary option. So I'm going to click on summary option. Now what summary option does is it uses any number fields which are available within your query, and then I can actually perform calculations, or summary details can be shown in the report in certain areas, right? So if I do the sum of my charges, I can actually show that value like on detail and summary, which means that I can actually show a total of my sum of my charges per page and per summary. So it'll actually add up all of the customer charges for a particular customer, plus it'll show me an overall for the page total. Because I've actually gone detail summary, I'll actually get a total, a complete total, right at the end of the report as well. So let's just do that, say OK. Now if we go next, and in this case what I want to do, I don't want stepped or blocked, I want outline, and I want landscape again, so I can maximise my amount of information that I put into my page. You guys can pick whatever you like, or whatever type of format that you'd like to use, but outline is what I'm going to pick here. I'll do, and I'm going to say client invoices, right? And I'm going to preview, say OK. So it's going to ask me the typical questions which I had before, and for client 12, these are the charges which I expect, right? And this is per client. So what happens is if I got rid of that dynamic query asking for the client, I would get a list of all of the clients, page by page by page. But I just said keep the current dynamic query where we just look for a client, and then I can print their particular charges. Now here you can see that because I pick the summary option, saying detail and summary, you notice the charges along here, they are returned by the query, right? By our payments due query. But the summary option means that this guy here is actually the total for this page, and then there's a grand total which actually shows. So if the grand total would have added up, if I didn't pick a particular client on the dynamic and I just listed all of my clients, I would have a grand total of money owed right at the end of the report. So page 92 for instance, which was what we had in the previous example. So now that I've actually created the report, now it's time to close the print preview and start modifying things, moving things around and so forth. Now, things that you should pick up here are little formatting tricks. So if I go, which I might do in a minute, but if I look at my summary option here, I can actually look at the property sheet, right? So I can go up here to the tools and say property sheet, and I've still highlighted my grand total, but I can actually say in here that I want to see the format in what type of format. So I can actually say currency. Right? So if I go back to my report and I run it, and previously it didn't show me the dollars, I'll go 12 again. You notice here that it's actually showing me hash, 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 hash. So a lot of people get a really worried, go, oh yeah, it's out of whack. But this field will now be shown in currency. So if I actually go to layout view, I'm not going to use design view, I'm just going to do layout view. I can click on this guy and expand him out, and you notice now it's using currency display. So you should have learned a couple of things. There is a property sheet, so you can set properties on all these on these entries or these fields. And the other thing is you can use layout view to actually modify the layout as well, right? And don't be scared if you see hash 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 hash, right? Okay, all right. So let's go off to the last activity in a second. Okay, so here we are for activity 7. It's the final one for this session. It's about modifying the report. I'm not actually going to spend that much time on showing you how to modify everything, but I'll show you the property sheet, the caption and so forth, like how do you put some text into your report, and I'll show you the just a simple one with horizontal, or where you see the form type controls that you can put into your report, right? So I'm going to use the invoice, the report we just created, the detail report, and I'm going to open 7 -7 for this activity. Right? So here I am with my databases, and number 7. Remember, number 8 is a complete version, so it has everything completed for you. So I'm going to open number 7, and once again, same deal again, enable content, make sure that we've got it in there. Now for the reports, you can see them down here. The last one that we did, the detail report, was the client invoice. So this is the one I'm going to be modifying, so I can just right click on there and actually go into design view or layout view, or let's just do that. Let's go directly to it. Now here is my form. Now the points of interest was that I can pick these like the sum values which I had previously, and like I showed you in the last report, or if let's say we just run this, we go 12, you notice these guys do not have dollar figures on them, right? So if I go back into design view, in design view I can actually click on any of these parameters and go to the property sheet. So it's under design property sheet. In the property sheet I've already got highlighted the grand total field, and I can say please show me currency. Right? Okay. I can also do the same thing for the summary for the totals if I knew what that was. Let's go all the way down here, the summary sum charge, right? And I'm going to say show me currency, right? I'll close this. You notice these two, you'll go control click. I'm actually going to expand them a bit. Actually I won't. Let's have a look. So you remember, if I run this, you'll actually see if I've got 12, you notice they're both hashed out, right? And it's not a problem, it's not an error, it's just the fact that we need to expand them out. So I'll go into layout view, and I'll control click, select both of them, and I'll open them up, and now you can see through the property side that I've actually put in currency in here. So let's close, let's go back here to design view. I'm going to go back to design view. Now design view, I can move things around here, right? So if I move my postcode, let's say here, if I just resize this guy, right? You notice it's moving both controls and so forth. So there's another thing that you have to remember, is that in design view there is a format. Sorry, not format, but in design view, if I actually go into right click on this guy, I can do layouts and say how I can lay things out. I can change change the position. I can align things to the grid. I can align things, fields to themselves or between themselves and so forth. I can change the effects of these guys as well. So I can actually pick this guy and go just as an offshoot, I'll say I'll make it sunken. Right? So if I run my report, 12, you can see the sunken field, right? But don't use sunken on your reports, because it kind of implies that you can modify things, right? It's like an entry field. So sunken, no, right? But looks good, but usability wise, not good. Right? Okay, let's go back to design view. And design view, I'm not going to change that, but let's say I want to put in a horizontal line here with my code. So let's say I'm going to move this thing down, and let's say I want to put a line across the bottom over here, so it splits my client details with my other details here. So I can actually go to design, and in design you have a bunch of tools here, right? So I can actually pick a line, right? And with the line I can draw my line in there. If I run it, let's see, 12, you notice I've got a line here. Now it's not very straight and so forth, right? So you can play around with that to make it straight, but then you can even change the properties or the properties of this line. So if I, let's say, I don't know if I've got it correct, but anyway, whatever. But if I go into the properties of this guy, I can change the width of it, right? Height of it, you know, is it a solid, is it a, so I can actually change all the different types of effects, what it actually looks like, right, in here, right? So it's really up to you guys to actually play around with the setups here. But main thing you have to understand is that I can even put in footer information into here, to actually put my name in here. So I can put in a text box right here, it's a label. This guy here is a text box. Don't use text box because it's actually linked to data within tables. So if you want to put some kind of text on your report, use the label. So I click on label, and I can put in here my name. And if you had a student number, right, S45, right. So now if I run my report, I go 12. I can actually get my ID across the bottom, so my footer, and we put in a horizontal line. Obviously you put a horizontal line across here and in between the summary and so forth. So if you're going to do paged bits, it looks a bit more professional. Plus you'd probably put a logo or something in the top here. So in other words, if I went to design view, I could click in here and then insert an image. Oh, sorry. Image, so I can put an image into this area here. So up to you, play around with these things. They're like page numbering, date formats and all that. You can put in headers and footers. It's really up to you to play around with the properties of how to format a report. Main thing is for this course is don't spend too much time playing around with formatting. Make sure your reports work. Good looking report, who really cares, make sure it works. Okay, all right, well done. That's the end of this session, and see you guys next week.